The practice of loving presence includes all of the other principles. It describes a way of being that is receptive. I like to describe it as a concave, not a convex energy, that we're sitting in the presence of somebody, taking them in, taking in the moment just as it is, and with gratitude, letting ourselves be nourished. It was so obvious to Ron when he was sitting with the person that he identified this state of mind with, that there was nothing for him to do, that he could be in this present and loving state with somebody, and the process was unfolding in a very healing way. And later he realized that there is a certain sequence of steps that can predictably lead one into this state. The first step being simply noticing what's already happening. The first part of the sequence is self-awareness. So if I'm noticing what's already happening and notice my habits and notice my impulses and can interrupt them, then I can choose the next state, which is a quieting state. It's inhibiting the normal habits and impulses and reactions so that I can be more receptive to what's happening. And those two are essential for allowing for the next state, which is, we call it seeing deeply or seeing through. And not seeing the person that we're with or the experience that we're having in a habitual way, but actually seeing more deeply. And if it's a person, seeing what we call the storyteller behind the story. And when we see deeply, it allows us to move into the next stage in this sequence, which we call non-egocentric nourishment, is allowing ourselves to take in the beauty of the person, something inspiring about the person, and actually to take it in as a source of nourishment for ourselves. It sounds very egocentric, but it's non-egocentric in the sense that it's not because of anything we've done. We're being gifted just in the way we would be gifted by a beautiful sunset. So non-egocentric nourishment is basically a way of searching for the beauty and the inspiration in the moment and then taking it in. And when we take it in and allow that to show, it is visible, tangible to the other person. It is the state of loving presence. One of the really brilliant things about Ron Kurtz was his ability to create a practice that would allow for an experience that created learning, for example. Hakomi is an experiential method, and it rests on the understanding that it's experience that shapes our brain, and that it's only new experience that changes our brain. Neuroscience research is proving now a lot of what Hakomi has been based on from the beginning, that we can pay attention to our experience, make a different choice about a reaction or a response, and the new experience that we have or are assisted to have by another person will actually change our brain, and that changes future experiences. So he was able to develop practices that were experiences of learning. And each of the stages of loving presence has some very particular practices that allow the cultivation of this state of loving presence to happen spontaneously, it seems like. But once we've developed self-awareness, quietness, the capacity to see through, we call it perceptual wisdom sometimes, the search for inspiration that allows us to be nourished in a particular way, there are practices for each of those that allow for the experiences that we have to result in, very predictably, this state of mind called loving presence. For example, one of the practices for the first stage of the sequence that leads us into the state of loving presence is a practice called monkey mind. And it's not unique to Hakomi. It's a very simple practice of paying attention and counting one's breaths and noticing every time our attention moves away from counting the breaths and starting again at 1. The intention of that practice is not to try to get to a higher number, try to count all our breaths. The intention is, as with all of the Hakomi method, really, the practices, is to notice what we're doing that isn't counting the breaths, what we're doing that's habitual. So all of the practices are experiences that allow us to become more aware of ourselves. And it would be a mistake to think of this monkey mind practice as learning how to keep our focus of attention on the breath so that we can get to a higher count. No, the whole point of that practice is to discover what else we're doing when our intention is to count breaths. What are our habits doing? And all of the whole method is based on this way of using simple practices or experiments in mindfulness to have an experience that reveals ourself to ourself. I was once doing a loving presence workshop in a place here in Canada. And on the second day, it was just a 2-day workshop, inviting people into these practices that are a sequential way of leading us to the state of loving presence. One of the participants asked me at the beginning of the second day, how to get into loving presence with, turned out it was her boss, somebody that's a total jerk. She said, I can imagine how to be in loving presence with my friends and family. She said, even these people here, these lovely people that came to this workshop, I can see how I can take in their beauty and be nourished by them. But this guy I work with, it's, how do I get into loving presence with him? And it was a perfect question. It fits with the whole idea of the method. The point of the practice is not how to get into loving presence with somebody. I mentioned to her that the whole idea of the method is, what am I doing that's not that? How can I discover what else is happening? And so the point of it is, we might have an intention, as with many other methods and many other practices, we might have an intention to do something, but our real curiosity and the gold that we mind is discovering what else happens. In spite of having that intention, what is my mind doing? What is my habitual reaction in this moment? And it's that discovery and that gold and that reaction that we discover that's on automatic that is the place where we can begin to explore other possibilities and ultimately find some freedom from the automaticity of being. That's a wonderful phrase that Ron Kurtz liked to use. The automatic way that we're going through life changes when we have this awareness. It can be a flash of awareness, like a flash of lightning when you're walking through a dark place that allows you to suddenly know where you are. Even if it gets dark again, you've seen it. You know where you are. You have some direction. And we can move beyond the automaticity of our way of being in life to a much more creative and choice-based way of being. One of the amazing learnings that happened for me watching Ron Kurtz teach was that if somebody asked a question like, how do I get into loving presence with somebody that's difficult for me, he didn't give them a lecture. He didn't give them a verbal answer. What I learned from him was how to create an experience, not just for the person asking the question, but if it's a group, create an experience for people in the group to find their own answer to that question. And if the answer is not how to get into loving presence, but what's in the way? What gets in the way? What am I doing? What am I thinking? What do I believe that's actually interfering with this so natural state, this absolutely natural state of loving presence? What else am I doing? So the response to that question is to invite people, probably in small groups or pairs at least, one person at a time, to call up the reaction. We know that what our brain thinks about, what our mind thinks about, triggers the nervous system into the same reaction that it would go into if it was actually happening. So we can remember something or fantasize something or imagine something, and our nervous system obliges us with the same reaction that would happen in real life. And then we study that with the help of someone else, because it's relational mindfulness and assisted self-study. And we study not just the thoughts, but the embodied experiences that are part of the reaction that gets in the way of, for example, loving presence. And so Ron was able to imagine and create the kind of exercises, you might call them exercises for learning, but we call them, in our way of training, practices, because they're based in mindfulness, and they're something that we can do over and over again. And each time that we sit in mindfulness and study a reaction or an experience that we're having, there's an opportunity for discovery and for learning, and therefore for choice. This way of creating an experiential learning context is not only part of a therapeutic session, but it's part of the way we do our entire training.